Corals have these very cool sexual reproductive spawning events. And in these spawning events, all the polyps in a region simultaneously release their eggs and sperm into the water column to distribute their offspring over as broad a geographic area as possible. We call it broadcast spawning. And in these synchronized events, the moments after the eggs and sperm release, we're talking millions of eggs and sperm here, for several minutes after, if you're in the water when that happens, if you're in the middle of all that, it's like being inside a snow globe. It's insane and beautiful. And after the release, the eggs and sperm just float out there until, if they're lucky, they join together and create a fertilized egg, which will form a larva, or planula. And the planulae swim upward toward the light, exhibiting positive phototaxis, entering the surface waters, transported by the current. Most planulae, the vast majority, don't make it. The broadcast spawning events have to produce so many because only a few will actually survive to become coral. But the ones that do, eventually they swim back down to the bottom where they metamorphose into polyps, which look like tiny upside-down jellyfish, and ultimately form colonies, which grow and grow and grow. And eventually maybe you do get something like the Great Barrier Reef, a monument to the collective will of these millions and millions of individual eggs and sperm becoming planulae, becoming polyps, becoming corals, becoming coral reef systems. You think about all the crazy ways life has evolved, and the one obvious consistent throughout, the one biological imperative is reproduce. That's it, reproduce. Any species, no matter what. It's not about, are you happy? It's not about, are you being a good coral or a bad coral? Are you fucking with other corals or being generous with your coral community? It's not about any of the things about being alive. It's only just, are you making more of yourself? Are you making more? Is your colony growing? Will you, the greater you, the you that is your species, will you survive? Will multiple generations of you survive? Some people point at that drive to survive as a species and say, oh, that's beautiful. The will to survive and maybe leave something behind, to maybe leave a legacy. I don't think of it as beautiful. It feels sort of sick to me, that blind will to reproduce at any cost with no ethics involved or morality or the possibility of other priorities, other ways of finding and constructing meaning and value, just reproduce. But when it comes to us, we work so hard at surviving, at leaving something behind. And why? What are we leaving behind?
Wow. Insane and beautiful, that's what you say in it. That's what I think of the play. Insane and beautiful. How do you start something like that, Sam? Like, how do you start? I like that piece too, because it says, I like titles, monument in it. But I think your title is also perfect for the piece too, in that it's really 3 titles.
Yeah, it's a lot of titles.
What did you start with?
Well, the first thing I wrote, I think, was this monologue. But the actual genesis, there's like so many different elements that were kind of, it's like, you know, okay, this is maybe a little bit of a sidetrack, but you know there's an essay Ursula K. Le Guin wrote called Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction? You know this one? So it's like, I'm not gonna, it's a very cool essay, which I love. She talks about how we have this classical idea of like the first human tool as like a spear, like civilization and like all this, and we use that and like thinking about how you write plays in this kind of linear fashion. It's like a spear, but that actually the most valuable item in like first technology of humans was a carrier bag where you can like collect seeds and doesn't take precious things home and like so you can have them for later. So it's actually a bag, like a pouch. And so this is a long aside to be like, I feel like a lot of the way I write plays in general, it's like the items that I find precious that have meaning to me, which I'm kind of collecting, and then like what I love about that way of thinking about storytelling is, you know, for her, she's talking about like, as opposed to like, there's different ways to tell stories and write stories and construct narratives. And this one is more about different items that have a pull together and like in proximity with one another, they have this kind of meaning. So all of that to say, I don't know like exactly when, like what started it. It was more these different pieces that together in proximity to one another had this, like became a story for me or became the play. And I think that like one of the things that started it was that I was like kind of obsessing about the idea of monuments and legacies and how everyone's like, I want to leave a legacy, or like, well, you have a child is a legacy, or you're like your work that you do, and what are you leaving behind, or like who's going to notice me, who's going to like what's going to elevate your like all of those questions, but also the kinds of what legacy do we leave behind as human beings, as a species, and like what is happening to the world, and what are the legacies we leave behind without wanting to, the ones that like what kind of legacy is this generation living for the next generation, like those kinds of questions. And so, and then things that aren't like what we choose as a society, what we deem worthy of elevating to the status of let's build a monument to this, and what is not. And so it was all of those. I think it was just thinking about like what are the what we don't recognize, what do we recognize and what don't we recognize and memorialize in our culture. And then I think that along with that there was, thinking a lot about sisters, because I'm one of 4 sisters, and I think my sisters might be a little bit nervous when they see this the title of this play, like, is this about us? But all of my plays have something of me in them, so they all tap into something personal, but it's not my sisters. But there's a lot about, like, I think I've always wanted to write about 4 sisters, so like that was in the mix, and like the dynamics and the love and the distance and the pain and the how to communicate the people you're closest to, but also can be the farthest from. And we were talking in the room the first day about how, like, when I started writing it, it was December of 2017, December of 2017. So that was like after a very bad election that happened.
Yes.
And I think, it was like a year after it, but I think I had not been able to write. I was writing, but I remember feeling like all of the accumulative horrible things happening in the world over that year since that election. So it was like a year after that. And I had given myself a few days to write. And so I had these swirling ideas about monument and sisters. And I feel like that's what I entered with, but I was also thinking about world and all of these different, the pressures. It just felt like the accumulation of pressure of like, I feel like I haven't been able to actually write anything in a long time because I feel a little bit beaten, like overwhelmed and paralyzed. I feel like a lot of when I'm writing plays, it's like I'm like, I had been thinking about the bleached coral. That was an image that I walked in with. But I was like, I don't even know what that means. And this is like a lot of what I write. I was like, I should learn what that is, because I know it's bad. It sounds bad, but I don't know what it means. And then I just started reading everything about it and learning about like what's actually happening in this kind of like crazy biological way, and how viscerally, like the violence of it, and how I was like, I knew it was bad, but now I know in a different way exactly, precisely like the nature of the bad, like how it's bad. And that's horrifying and also really, I think, useful. And I found it it became like built into the play. So, and then it like connected with like cartoon sloths came in, because I don't know why. I think it was just a silly, they were there. They just joined in. And then I was like, I don't know anything about sloths either. And there was this crazy thing about the algae. But I feel like there's a lot of like, it's like kind of these, you take these tangents and then you do like doing these little like exploratory dives and finding something else, and it's all like knitting together in a way which was always maybe there, but it coheres after all of those different ingredients come together. But it's like there's always a sense of them belonging together, and I feel like a lot of what the play is about like this sense of catastrophe and like having these private catastrophes, and how we're all going through, we all know what we've all been going through as a collective, like pandemic, like horrible things. And then we don't know about, all of the kind of different disasters people are navigating in their own homes, in their own personal psyches. And I think thinking about that and the global catastrophes and like how do we come back after that, or how do you come together and find any sense of community or belonging, like how you have resilience in these kinds of moments. I don't think I'm just babbling.
You're
But
not
I
babbling
think
at
that
all.
was how it's a simple answer.
But if you think of all these, and everything is monumental, big that you're talking about, how conscious then? Because the play is not. It's deeply felt and deeply thought, but it's also full of a lot of space and fun, and just funny too. Do you think that? I guess the question is like, is that how conscious is that aspect of it too? Because if we were to sort of isolate, hey, what's the play about? Oh man, it's about monuments, what you can leave behind, and the disasters and extinction, and having despots, and all real shit that is really really happening in this real world that we're living in.
Right.
And yet how you navigate it in the world of your language and really the life of the characters is not. Do you think that that's a sort of natural reflection of how you navigate life and the disasters and the pain and?
Yeah, I feel like that's all necessary. I feel like it's part of the fabric of it. I think that's a really good. I'm so glad you. That's such a, because it's true. It's like disaster and catastrophe sound. It's very, very weighted, and I think so much of it is. I think it's the natural way of any kind of tragedy has it's all built in. It's comedy, tragedy, and we kind of need the laughter to survive and also to engage with it.
Yep.
And I think that the specificity of the sisters' journeys and what they are grappling with, like, it is comical. Like, some of this shit is just ridiculous. So, like,
Right.
like the room that Connie's in and her TV room and the kinds of things people will say to you, like, it's horrible. And it's also it's so funny. It's like the kinds of things that you go through, or even, it's harder to get the comedy out of, the coral dying, I think. I think the moments are about like what Mac is dealing with like, there's this thing that happened, and even just the comedy of trying to like rank the difficulty of your experience and not wanting to say it's so hard. You're like, it's not really that hard, because there's a lot of other shit that people are dealing with, which is like way worse. Or like, I know what you're thinking, but I don't know what you're thinking. And all of the like mental, psychological gymnastics that we do, like that's funny. And it's also like sad. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of real estate that Mac is devoting to bullshit that she could really be using those thoughts for something else that would maybe be productive. And I think it's like, but that's all what a lot of us do. It's just like kind of wrestling with that. So I do feel that the comedy is so necessary for the play to function. Like the play would be a disaster. It would be an actual disaster if there was none of that light of the grappling and the comedy that comes out of it, which is really just being able to recognize the absurdity and that like that's a familiar thing that what I hope is that a lot of the comedy can come from just like the recognition of something like oh, that resonates because I know that feeling, and we know what it is to engage in that, and so I feel like that. I don't think it's. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's just you said the play couldn't work that way, but it also makes me think like life couldn't work that way too. Like, and so it's so specific. There's so many. It's like doing a deep dive into the ocean. There's so many things around you, but to me, it's like the connector. If you fall down into or you drop down into the ocean, is really this family, and very specifically for API sisters, children of immigrants. Because what you're talking about that, and not to get too ethnic studies about it, but
please get ethnic studies about it.
That navigation of life to say like, well, the shit wouldn't work that way. Well, your life wouldn't work that, what I mean? If you thought about, well, and then we came over in this way and this And then this befell us, and then this roadblock got put in front of us, and then this systemic thing happened, and then this firing happened, and then this bullshit happened at work. And then I got, all of the shit that you hear from your grandmother to your auntie to your mom to whoever, to yourself even. But thinking more in our lineage too. Like I guess it's so ingrained in you, I suppose. I mean, but in specific in this story, there is that touchstone for all of them that they know from what they come, and in a very sophisticated but instrumental way, they know the events that have sort of formed their psychology in a way as children of immigrants too, which is a different trip than all other trips, And it's so dope because the aesthetic and the form of the writing follow that. Like even what we're talking about. Like if you were to be like, hey, write some shit about the death of coral, that could be some pretty heavy shit, because it is some pretty heavy shit. But if you have this built-in thing in your DNA, in your navigation skills, in your, for better or for worse, psychological sort of armor, then you're like, yeah, but if I didn't laugh at the shit that is hella sad, then what the fuck would I do?
Right.
Like cry?
Right.
And then I would cry every day? And then what would I do on the 8th day? Like, what the fuck? Like, I gotta show up to work too, and I gotta feed these 4 girls too. So I don't know. I just think that that's all so ingrained in the whole thing. It moves me in that way, in thinking about, especially like being in San Francisco, where you see especially these women like that everywhere you go, everywhere. I find that very profound. And I imagine I guess it's secondary in your thinking of the writing, meaning Four Sisters is the sort of subtitle of the title, or the secondary titling, or the secondary thought.
I don't think of it as secondary. No, I think that's the way I talked about it, and I always have a hard time with titles, honestly. I feel like...
I don't think you have a hard time. I think that's what it is. Like, it can't be the shoe, or it's not called the coral, because that's not what it is.
Right.
It's Four Sisters, and it is a slow-moving, ever-evolving survivalistic sloth, a deceptive, beautiful creature, It's all of the things, and it is the monument and all of it.
Yeah, I wanted the slots in there because I was like, oh, long titles are so obnoxious. But then I was like, but I feel like it's helpful.
It is a little Barry, a dance theater title.
But I thought if it was just monument, I was like, monument's simple. I was like, that's so, like, oh my gosh, that's very pretentious. Like, monument. Come see my play, Monument. I was like, okay, monument or Four Sisters, because a lot of the investigations were like, what is a monument? Are Four Sisters a monument, like a kind of monument? And then, but I was like, that's also pretty, like, Three Sisters. I'm just trying to check off. But so I wanted to have like, well, it's all sloth. There's also playful, fun sloths in it. And it's like apparent that I had to, I think I was trying to make it like, to frame the whole experience. So you don't go in, like, I think it's so important that you don't know. I mean, and that's also part of what the changing the structure did in terms of just like putting some of that in the beginning, the childhood stuff. But yeah. But also, we were talking, so I'm jumping back to just a quick thought, that the comedy stuff is also like, it's also how you, when we were talking in the room the other day about just the kinds of tools you learn when you're growing up in that environment, that's also, it's not just like, oh, we need the comedy, but you also need to be able to, that's how you have to, maybe that's exactly what you're saying.
I'm with you. I mean, that's how
I for some reason it felt like a shade
too.
different, but it was about like learning to deploy it yourself, because that's the way you can survive and make sense of it, and like that's your strength. When you can use that, it's a power, because you can turn things around or like make it feel manageable, or like, oh, this really like awful thing happening is something I actually have I can manipulate it and control it and like weave it into some other shit, something else that can feel good.
Well, that's what I love, the for lack of a better sort of play term, like the sort of monologues or, dialogues with the audience that each of the sisters has in a certain way, is that you don't narrow it or force yourself to sort of create a beginning, middle, and end. It's much closer to the reality of how our psyche works, which is when you let it rip and you have something in your gut, unless it's some easy shit, and if it's some easy shit, then let's not have a monologue about it.
Right.
But if it's the monumental thing that you can't get over, of course you're gonna do exactly what you said. Well, it is a monument, but I don't want you to think I'm trying to say that my shit is more important than your shit, or but it's also about my sister. But I'm not saying that you know what I mean? Like there's always this sort of
Thank you for seeing me. Yes.
Yeah, and that's I rarely do we get to see our psyche sort of just it just runs. I mean, that's what our psyches do, I think, a lot of time, and we don't get to see that because we think of monologue. You go, well, this shit better be a page or better be under a page, and where's the end? I don't know. If I knew the end, I wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? I wouldn't have started the conversation with myself or with, the air or the atmosphere. If I knew the answer, I wouldn't have begun this quest for you to understand it. And that's what I feel like all of them are attempting to do or raising up. I love it. I love too that almost that style of thought or speech, whatever we would call it, that carrier bag that you're talking about too, it's so it allows for memory and complexity. And when I mean complexity is like there are moments that affect you and we're not just like instinct creatures that could be like, oh, I understand the significance. Oh, that means this. And therefore I can place this within my heart and that. I mean, the stuff that really rubs against for sometimes for a long time, sometimes forever. And I think that's part of the element of the carrier bag, and that you say, well, I'm gonna pull this one out because it's in some ways you're saying these are the things in the bag that are speaking back to me in a way. Not to be obnoxious about writing, but there is a part of it, like whatever it is you've carried with you, Sam, that one day you go, I'm gonna let some of these motherfuckers out. And it's not gonna be like, I'm gonna pick the prettiest one to be like, the one that's talking back to me the most is the one that's gonna start it. And then there's these other things in it. But I wonder too, because I've known you so long, how much of that carrier bag it got you even into, quote unquote, the larger aspect of theater in general. Like, meaning like, you didn't wake up at 17 and said, I'm gonna do this college thing in order to become a writer, in order to write plays, and these plays are gonna do this, that, and the other. Or if you did, you kept it way in the cuts, because when I knew you were doing everything under the form of gathering, performative gathering, whether it was music, stand-up, drinking, smoking, they all count. They all count. So everyone out there that drinks or smokes, you too are a storyteller, and just everything. And so at what point did you go, oh, I'm a formalize this and make it, or like theater is the shit that I need to follow? Because the path was so varied and always creative, but varied, and definitely in a really intentional, exciting way, formless, meaning like not being boxed in.
Yeah. Because all of that is, I feel like that's all in the writing, like it's all like what you're saying, because it was like working with artists in all mediums, just like as a kind of more of an organizer, right? Like administrator, organizer, and getting to work with comic book, right? Like comic book artists and dancers and fiction writers and visual sculptors, all that stuff, musicians, and then doing music, making music. Not very well, but it matters a lot to me. I brought my guitar with me. It's in the hotel room. Still play for myself. And doing stand-up and making theater with people and sketch. I mean, that is, and like you're saying, just like being part of community is a storytelling. So I feel like that's all. It is so much the, like where the DNA of all of my, or I don't know, it's just like the soul of everything I work. I feel like that's always there, and that's like how I understand myself as a writer. And I think that, I know the formalizing thing is an interesting question, because I remember when I decided, I was like, oh, I don't know anything about structure. I feel like I'm like writing plays, but I don't know anything about writing plays.
Right.
And I don't understand. People make references to things. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, I don't understand I don't even know what structure is. Like, of course, we all do. It's like, you don't need to go get a fucking degree to know how to write a play. But I think I was just like, oh, I want to be able to focus and learn more about that, because I think that was where I was feeling drawn to. And maybe because, like, I remember that stand-up was making me feel really, as if this is so different. No, I remember thinking like, oh, I'm really like, the neediness I have for the audience to love me. And like, I need to see it like immediately. Like, they need to love me now. And if they don't, I'm gonna feel like shit. I'm gonna hate, I'm gonna obsess over it. I'm just gonna be like, they didn't laugh, blah, blah, blah. Because there was a point in stand-up where I was like, oh my God, stand-up is what like allowed me to look people in the eye. Because before stand-up and I did performance, and I would just look at the top of people's heads when I performed, because I was terrified. I was like, I'll see their judgment and they'll hate me. And doing stand-up was like, I have to, because I was doing it at these tiny little venues, like bars and coffee shops. I was like, oh shit, like, if you will know I'm not looking in your eyes.
Right.
I was like, oh, it made me so strong, stand-up. It made me like really be able to like look at people. And then at a certain point, I was like, oh, I think stand-up is making me really crazy. I think it's making me really like self-absorbed and psychotic and like so needy. And I hate that. Like, I just want, like, why do I need people's approval so badly all the time? But I feel like and so I think I was like, I don't want to always be in my shit. Like, I don't want to be like clocking that. I just want to be able to work on this, like explore this writing and make these stories, and other people can perform them for a while. But it's like, I'm not going to stop performing. And I think that happened like more of a gradual, like it was not, I was like, oh, it is kind of nice to have all this time to work on writing and like think about it and work with other writers, and we can like explore stuff. So the formalizing happened gradually, because I think going from like, I think I used to say, I was like, I'm a writer performer.
Right.
Like a writer performer, and I'm an organizer, and I'm an educator. And I think it just became simpler over time. But it's true that all that stuff is still there. And I feel like, I still feel like I think, like I write like I'm I write like I'm gonna be performing it. Like, I think I'm always feeling it very viscerally, which is, I think, just part of my process, because I would need to. It's like, I don't know. So I don't think those categories are useful. I feel like I start going in I sometimes feel like, it's dumb to be like, I'm a playwright, period. And then sometimes it's just a simple thing to do. Yeah. And I think sometimes there's like the way that the world, the institutions work. They're like, oh, you want to get this grant. How do you identify? This is for playwrights. Like, I'm a playwright for sure. Yeah. Like, here's a residency. It's for playwrights. Oh, am I a resident playwright? Okay, guess I'm a resident playwright. Yeah. So it's like, right. I think in some ways those titles get imposed on you, and they become useful in a way just to survive as an artist, and be like, oh, I got to apply for every grant I can and get every fellowship I can. And also, it's so annoying to do like //. I'm a writer / playwright / performer / organist or art educator. I'm like, that's annoying looking. Like, it just, like, to me, like, I love it. I honor and respect and have so much respect whenever anyone who does it. I found myself feeling like, oh, all these slashes are really fussy. Like, for me, the same way I feel like it's fussy if I call myself Samantha. I was like, Jesus, cut out those 2 syllables. Like, Sam is fine. And so I don't, like, it's a personal choice, and it just feels cleaner.
Certainly with your name, it's a personal choice, yes.
It's just a clean, it just is aesthetically, I prefer a simpler way to describe. And if I just said, I'm an artist, that would feel douchey. I mean, like, pretentious. And it's not. Yeah. But it would feel that way. But the truth is, I do feel more multi-hyphenate or like umbrella term artist, even though I've been, but then you find yourself, because you use those simple terms, that you wind up writing it, like working in the, I mean, I shouldn't say you, I have found that. But I've read like, but you're right. I think it's limiting, and I don't think it's accurate. And I think that in terms of like who I am as a writer and an artist is definitely, when I spent the 10 years in the Bay Area, in San Francisco with Spindlestiff and KSW and Locust and the Intersection, and like, that's home. That's my artistic home. Yeah. Like, that's when I feel like where I always am in a way. And I feel like that's why it's so amazing to be back here and with this play, because this play I did think of as like I think of being here with a lot of my writing, but I imagine this play. I said this in the room the other day. I imagine it's in the Bay Area. Like I imagine, and a lot of the places I think about are Bay Area places. But I imagine when they're at Amy's, they're in the Bay Area. And it's never said, but that's where I see it and that's where I feel it.
Is that how you get? I love what you're saying about the experience of your path doing stand-up. I remember when you did that. But there's the sort of mainlining of it is like, I say it, here's the story, and you experience it, and then you reflect that back to me. And I mean, I think that is part of the path of any story or storytelling. How do you... Where do you sort of float in the orbit of it now, or the ocean of it now? And the more formalized so-called theater process, like writer writes the shit, give us some pages, and if you're there, you're there. If you're not, you're not. We're gonna do your shit, and this person's gonna interpret it, and they're gonna interpret it. I mean, not that it's that way for you, or that it has to be that way. Obviously, it's not. Especially with new work, we're all got our hands on all this shit. But how consciously do you feel that either the need or the urge for the communal part of the process? Because it is communal to be like, look, I just tell you some shit on the microphone 8 feet from me, and I need to know, like, is you listening or you not listening? And how does that happen for you now with plays? Because plays are intimate, but they're also very distant in the process sometimes.
Right.
I mean, do you feel it when you go to first rehearsal? Do you feel it on the first audience?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I was going to say, it's totally still absolute. Like, I feel like the communal thing is huge for me. I feel like it's necessary, and I can't. I think I was making sure I was understanding the question right, but I think that the relationship with the community and being part of a community, creating it, the community of like director, crew, cast, designers, all that in the room, or just the actors, director, earlier stage. I feel like when I'm writing on my own, what I love is when I get to hear it with other people or read it with other people. Like that's like the amazing. It's really like the process of writing on my own is one thing, but it needs when I get there. But then I immediately, it's a very similar dynamic. I'll be in the room like, here's some pages I wrote. Like, see what you. Just want to hear it. Right. No expectations. Right. And then I'll be like, why are they laughing? Nobody's laughing. This is very funny. Why aren't you laughing? And I experience that at rehearsals, even when I'm like, Sam, like they know that it's fine. Like we're not trying to get a laugh in this rehearsal room around a table. Right. I was like, I think I always am. I'm always like, where's the laugh? And when I go to the first, any first performance with an audience, it's excruciating. In the same way, it's always like it's exciting. Of course, it's exciting, and it feels so. It is such a collaboration and community process, and I do love that. I feel like that part of playwriting versus the solo stuff. Because that was always embedded in community. But I think with theater, with every show, every project, every piece, it has its own community that coalesces around it, and then that's like hearing the first. Public, like reading in public or performance in public, is always so tough because it's a similar dynamic that I was saying. It's like, I think this stand-up thing's unhealthy for me, and it is different because it's such a different kind of process. It's not the only way to hear the play. So I feel like I'm learning now to not expect, it's okay if there's no.
But it seems like you also you have the gift of what I read and experience is you can populate it with if they're not versions of yourself, certainly versions of your world. And that feels, it feels, because I know you, feels very specifically your voice, but it's the power to reflect and represent feels like massive comparatively to the sort of singular impression of a solo storyteller.
Right. No, I think that is a cool. I mean, they're just like different opportunities, right? Like a solo storyteller is able to do that because they can do very many different characters, and they have like this immediate, intimate relationship, this direct relationship with people in the room who you're in the room with. And then with plays, you do have different kinds of opportunities to represent all these different, at the same time, like different people in the room at once who can be on stage together.
Yeah.
And maybe you, the writer, are not going to be in direct conversation. But yeah, no, I mean, I do think that they're different strengths, but I do enjoy those different, those different kinds of ways to represent different, or to embody different people. Yeah, sloths are very good swimmers. They can hold their breath for up to 40 minutes. They move much more quickly underwater than on land.
I see.
I mean, it's like being here, like walking to the Magic Theater. I'm like, okay, I keep saying the magic, but it was always magic. But I always said the magic.
I think you should say the magic.
It is the magic. Yeah. Why do some people just say magic though? Okay, sorry. We're
No,
low on time.
point.
Glad we're taking this little detour because this is definitely going to make the video.
That's advertising. You don't understand. That's advertising.
But I walked the magic.
You nailed it.
I just know that when I walked the magic the first day of rehearsal, and I hadn't been to this part of town. I haven't been back in years, and I never actually spent time in this part of town regularly, except for going to the magic.
Yep.
And it's just, I kind of just stopped in my tracks when I saw the water, and I was like, it's just stunning. And it did feel like, oh, this is like this geography nestling this piece feels very. This is its home, and it felt really like I was just kind of stopped in my tracks. That was very stunning. The place.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel. I don't have more
That's good.
to say.
That's
Sean?
beautiful.
Sorry.
Through the